Lady Victoria Langley had once been the undisputed belle of London society, her beauty and vivacious spirit making her the most sought-after young woman of the 1818 season, with dukes and earls competing for the privilege of a single dance, and mothers of eligible sons plotting elaborate schemes to secure her attention for their offspring. At 22, she possessed everything the ton valued most: flawless beauty with golden hair that caught the light like spun silk, cornflower blue eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief, and a figure that moved through ballrooms with the grace of a swan gliding across still water. Her wit was as sharp as her beauty was stunning, her laughter as musical as church bells on a clear morning, and her presence so magnetic that entire rooms seemed to brighten when she entered, conversations pausing as heads turned to admire the woman who embodied everything society deemed perfect in a lady of quality. But perfection, as Victoria would learn in the most devastating way possible, was as fragile as morning frost, as easily shattered as the finest crystal, and as temporary as the applause that had once followed her every appearance in public. The riding accident that changed everything happened on a crisp October morning when Victoria, mounted on her favourite mare and accompanied by her closest friend, decided to take a path through the woods that she had travelled countless times before, never imagining that a startled deer would cause her horse to rear and throw her against the unforgiving trunk of an ancient oak tree with such force that the sound of impact echoed through the forest like a gunshot. In that single terrible moment, the golden girl of London society became something else entirely. A woman whose legs would never again carry her across a dance floor, whose graceful movements were replaced by the necessity of a wheeled chair, whose very presence now served as an uncomfortable reminder to others of how quickly fortune could change and how fragile the human body truly was. The transformation in how society treated her was swift and merciless, as though her paralysis were somehow contagious, as though proximity to her misfortune might somehow taint their own blessed circumstances. Former suitors vanished like smoke, their ardent declarations of love proving as substantial as morning mist when faced with the reality of a bride who could not walk down the aisle on her own, could not dance at her own wedding, could not fulfill the physical expectations that marriage entailed. Mothers who had once schemed to secure her as a daughter-in-law now whispered behind fans about the tragedy of her condition, their sympathy tainted with relief that their own daughters remained whole and marriageable. Even her closest friends began to treat her differently, their conversations becoming stilted and careful, their invitations growing fewer and more conditional, as though they feared that including her in their activities would somehow diminish the joy of the occasion or remind everyone present of life's inherent uncertainty. For 2 years, Victoria endured this gradual exile with a dignity that impressed some and unsettled others, maintaining her composure even as her world contracted from the grand ballrooms of Mayfair to the confines of her family's estate, where she could retreat from the pitying stares and uncomfortable silences that had replaced the admiration and eager attention she had once commanded. She learned to navigate not just the physical challenges of her new reality, but the emotional landscape of a society that had no place for imperfection, no patience for anything that disrupted their carefully maintained illusions of beauty, health, and eternal youth. It was during one of her rare appearances at a London gathering, a musical evening that her mother had insisted she attend, arguing that isolation would only make her situation worse, that Duke Adrian Montrose first truly saw her, not as the tragic figure others perceived, but as a woman of extraordinary strength and grace, whose spirit had been tested by adversity and emerged not broken but refined, like gold purified in fire. Adrian, 34 years old, and possessed of the kind of commanding presence that made other men step aside and women flutter behind their fans, had built his reputation on his unwavering moral principles, his refusal to be swayed by popular opinion, and his ability to see worth where others saw only surface appearances. When he witnessed the cruel whispers that followed Victoria's entrance into the drawing room, saw the way people averted their eyes, or offered the kind of overly bright smiles that spoke more of discomfort than genuine warmth, something inside him ignited with a righteous fury that demanded action. "She is mine," he declared suddenly, his voice cutting through the polite murmur of conversation like a blade through silk, the words falling into the stunned silence that followed, with the weight of a pronouncement that would change not just 2 lives, but the very foundation of how society understood worth, beauty, and the true meaning of love. The declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled company, transforming what had been a quiet musical evening into the kind of social earthquake that would be discussed in drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs for months to come, as London's most eligible and powerful duke had just claimed as his own the woman that no one else would touch, the lady that society had written off as unmarriageable, and the beauty whose imperfection had made her invisible to everyone, except the one man who possessed the courage to see past the surface to the extraordinary woman beneath. The morning of October 15th, 1818, dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden autumn light that made even the most mundane countryside appear touched by magic. Lady Victoria Langley woke in her elegant bedchamber at Langley Park with the same sense of anticipation that had characterized her mornings for as long as she could remember. The eager expectation of a day filled with possibilities, adventures, and the simple joy of being young, beautiful, and beloved by all who knew her. At 22, Victoria embodied everything that Regency society valued in a lady of quality. Her golden hair caught the morning light streaming through her bedroom windows, creating a halo effect that had inspired more than one poet to attempt verses in her honor. Her cornflower blue eyes sparkled with intelligence and mischief, reflecting a spirit that found delight in even the smallest pleasures of life. Her figure was perfectly proportioned, moving with the natural grace that had made her the most sought-after dancing partner in London, and her smile could light up the darkest room and lift the heaviest heart. "Good morning, my lady," her maid Sarah said as she entered with the morning tea service. "It's a beautiful day for riding. Shall I prepare your blue habit?" "Indeed you shall," Victoria replied, stretching luxuriously in her comfortable bed. "I promised Lady Catherine I would join her for a morning ride through Ashford Woods. The autumn colours are supposed to be spectacular this year." As Sarah helped her dress in the elegant riding habit that emphasized her tiny waist and graceful carriage, Victoria hummed softly to herself, her mind already anticipating the pleasure of a gallop through the countryside with her dearest friend. She had no premonition of disaster, no sense that this would be the last morning she would wake with the casual assumption that her body would obey her every command, that her legs would carry her wherever she wished to go. Lady Catherine Ashford arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, her own excitement evident as she greeted Victoria in the stable yard where their horses waited. At 21, Catherine was Victoria's closest friend and confidant, the only person who could match her for spirit and love of adventure. "Victoria, you look absolutely radiant this morning," Catherine exclaimed as they mounted their horses. "I swear you grow more beautiful every day. It's positively unfair to the rest of us mere mortals." "Nonsense," Victoria laughed, settling gracefully into her side saddle on her favorite mare, Starlight. "You're fishing for compliments, and you know perfectly well that you're just as lovely as anyone in the county." "Perhaps, but I don't have half of London's eligible bachelors writing poetry about my eyebrows," Catherine replied with good-natured envy. "Speaking of which, I heard that Lord Pemberton has commissioned a portrait artist to paint your likeness from memory. Apparently, he's convinced that gazing upon your beauty will inspire him to greater heights of romantic devotion." Victoria rolled her eyes, though she was secretly pleased by the attention. "Lord Pemberton is a dear man, but his romantic devotion tends to be rather overwhelming. Last week, he sent me a bouquet so large that it required 3 footmen to carry it into the house. And what about the Duke of Worthington? Mamma says he's been asking Papa about your family's financial situation. She thinks he's preparing to make an offer." "The Duke is certainly handsome and wealthy," Victoria mused, as they rode through the gates of Langley Park and onto the country lane that led to Ashford Woods. "But I'm not certain we would suit. He seems rather serious. I can't imagine him laughing at my silly jokes or joining me in any of the adventures I love so much." "Victoria Langley, you are impossibly romantic," Catherine declared. "Most women would be thrilled to marry a duke, regardless of his sense of humor." "Most women aren't as fortunate as I am," Victoria replied, with the unconscious confidence of someone who had never known real hardship or disappointment. "I can afford to wait for love, Catherine. I want to marry someone who sees me as more than just a pretty ornament for his drawing room." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the spectacular display of red and gold leaves that painted the countryside in brilliant hues. Victoria felt her spirits soar as Starlight moved beneath her with smooth, powerful strides, carrying her through a world that seemed designed specifically for her pleasure and enjoyment. It was as they entered the deeper part of Ashford Woods, following a familiar path they had travelled dozens of times before, that disaster struck with the sudden, devastating force of a lightning bolt from a clear sky. A deer, startled by their approach, burst from the underbrush directly in front of Starlight's path. The mare, normally the most placid and reliable of mounts, reared in surprise and terror, her hooves pawing the air as she fought to avoid the unexpected obstacle. Victoria, caught completely off guard, felt herself slipping from the side saddle, her hands losing their grip on the reins as gravity and momentum conspired against her. Time seemed to slow as she fell, the world spinning around her in a kaleidoscope of blue sky, golden leaves, and Catherine's horrified face. She had a single crystal-clear moment of understanding that something terrible was about to happen, that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine. The impact, when it came, was devastating. Victoria's back struck the massive trunk of an ancient oak tree with such force that the sound echoed through the forest like a gunshot. Pain exploded through her body, so intense and overwhelming that it drove all thought from her mind, leaving only a white-hot agony that seemed to consume every nerve ending. And then, mercifully, there was darkness. When Victoria next opened her eyes, she was lying in her own bed at Langley Park, surrounded by faces that swam in and out of focus like figures in a dream. Her mother, Lady Margaret Langley, sat beside the bed, with tears streaming down her face. The family physician, Dr. Whitmore, stood nearby with an expression of grave concern. Catherine hovered in the background, her face pale with shock and guilt. "Victoria, darling, thank God you're awake," her mother whispered, taking her hand with gentle care. "We've been so worried. You've been unconscious for 2 days." Victoria tried to speak, but her throat felt raw and dry. When she finally managed to form words, her voice was barely a whisper. "What happened?" "I remember falling, but everything after that is—" "You had an accident, my dear," Dr. Whitmore said gently, moving closer to the bed. "Your horse was startled by a deer, and you were thrown against a tree. You've suffered a serious injury to your spine." "My spine?" Victoria repeated, confusion clouding her thoughts. "But I feel, that is, I don't feel—" She tried to move her legs, to shift her position in the bed, and felt a cold wave of terror wash over her as she realized that her body wasn't responding to her commands. "Victoria," Dr. Whitmore said, his voice infinitely gentle, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. The injury to your spine has affected your ability to move your legs. At this point, we don't know if the paralysis is temporary or—" "Paralysis!" Victoria's voice rose in panic as the full meaning of his words began to penetrate her consciousness. "You mean I can't walk?" "Not at present, no," the doctor confirmed, his professional composure barely concealing his own distress at having to deliver such devastating news to someone so young and vital. "With time and proper care, there's always hope for improvement, but I must be honest with you about the severity of your condition." The room seemed to spin around Victoria as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. She couldn't walk. She couldn't dance. She couldn't ride. Everything that had defined her life, everything that had made her who she was, had been taken away in a single moment of misfortune. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, this can't be happening. This can't be real." "Victoria, darling, please try to stay calm," her mother pleaded. But Victoria could see the devastation in her eyes, the knowledge that her daughter's life had been irrevocably altered. "How can I stay calm?" Victoria cried, her voice breaking with anguish. "How can any of this be real? Yesterday I was perfect, and now I'm—" "You're still perfect," Catherine said suddenly, stepping forward from the shadows where she had been standing. "Victoria, you're still the same person you were before the accident. You're still beautiful, still intelligent, still the kindest and most wonderful friend anyone could ask for." But even as Catherine spoke the words, Victoria could see the doubt in her eyes, the uncertainty about how to relate to someone whose circumstances had changed so dramatically. The pity in her friend's expression was almost worse than the physical pain, a reminder that she was no longer the golden girl everyone had admired, but something else entirely, an object of sympathy and uncomfortable concern. Over the following weeks, as Victoria slowly came to terms with her new reality, she began to understand just how profoundly her accident had changed not just her physical capabilities, but her entire place in the world. The stream of visitors that had once filled Langley Park's drawing rooms slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. The invitations to balls and parties that had once arrived daily became increasingly rare, then ceased entirely. Her former suitors, those ardent admirers who had once competed for her attention with such enthusiasm, simply vanished. Lord Pemberton, who had been on the verge of proposing, sent a polite note expressing his sympathy, but made no further contact. The Duke of Worthington, who had been making inquiries about her family's financial situation, suddenly found pressing business that required his immediate attention elsewhere. "They're cowards, all of them," Catherine declared during one of her increasingly infrequent visits. "Any man worthy of you would see past this temporary setback to the wonderful woman you've always been." "Temporary?" Victoria replied with a bitter laugh that held no trace of her former musical quality. "Catherine, it's been 3 months. Dr. Whitmore has made it clear that my condition is permanent. I will never walk again, never dance again, never be the woman I once was." "But you're still you," Catherine insisted, though Victoria could hear the strain in her voice, the effort it took to maintain her optimistic facade. "You're still beautiful, still intelligent, still unmarriageable," Victoria finished quietly. "Still a burden rather than an asset. Still someone to be pitied rather than admired." Catherine fell silent, unable to argue with the harsh truth of Victoria's assessment. Society had indeed written her off, dismissed her as damaged goods, relegated her to the category of tragic figures who served as cautionary tales rather than objects of desire. But Victoria was determined not to become a recluse, not to disappear entirely from the world that had once celebrated her. With grim determination, she learned to navigate her new reality, mastering the use of the wheeled chair that had become her constant companion, adapting her wardrobe to accommodate her changed circumstances, and preparing herself to face a society that no longer knew how to treat her. The first test came 6 months after her accident, when her mother finally convinced her to attend a small musical evening hosted by Lady Pemberton. Victoria knew it would be difficult, knew that she would face stares and whispers, and the kind of overly bright sympathy that was somehow worse than outright rejection. But she also knew that hiding away would only confirm society's assumption that she had become something less than she had been. As her carriage drew up to the Pemberton mansion, Victoria took a deep breath and steeled herself for what was to come. She had no way of knowing that this evening would mark not just her return to society, but the beginning of a love story that would challenge everything the Ton believed about worth, beauty, and the true meaning of perfection. Inside that elegant drawing room, a man was waiting who would see past her wheelchair to the extraordinary woman within, who would recognize that true nobility had nothing to do with the ability to walk and everything to do with the courage to face adversity with grace and dignity. Duke Adrian Montrose was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories began not with perfection, but with the courage to see beauty in unexpected places. The Duke's Declaration. The Pemberton mansion blazed with light on the evening of Victoria's return to society, its elegant windows casting golden rectangles across the manicured gardens, as London's elite gathered for what was promised to be an intimate musical soirée. Lady Pemberton had assured Victoria's mother that the guest list would be small and select, composed of only their closest friends and most understanding acquaintances, a consideration that Victoria both appreciated and resented, knowing that her presence now required such careful management. Duke Adrian Montrose arrived fashionably late, as was his custom, his imposing figure cutting through the crowd with the kind of unconscious authority that made other men step aside and women flutter behind their fans. At 34, Adrian was considered one of London's most eligible bachelors, though his reputation for moral rectitude and unwavering principles had earned him as many enemies as admirers among the Ton's more frivolous members. Standing 6 feet 3 inches tall, with dark hair that showed the first distinguished threads of silver at the temples and steel-grey eyes that seemed to miss nothing, Adrian possessed the kind of commanding presence that filled any room he entered. His features were aristocratic and strong, marked by a jawline that spoke of determination and cheekbones that emphasized his noble heritage, while his bearing radiated the confidence of a man who had never doubted his own worth or his place in the world. But beneath his ducal facade, Adrian carried the weight of personal tragedy that had shaped his character in profound ways. His younger sister had been born with a withered arm, a condition that had made her the subject of cruel whispers and social ostracism until her death from fever at the age of 16. The experience had taught Adrian to see past surface imperfections to the character beneath, and it had instilled in him a fierce protective instinct toward anyone society deemed less than perfect. As he made his way through Lady Pemberton's drawing room, exchanging polite greetings with acquaintances and deflecting the subtle matchmaking attempts of ambitious mothers, Adrian's attention was caught by the unusual arrangement of furniture near the pianoforte. A space had been cleared, and a chair positioned in such a way that suggested accommodation for someone with special needs. "Ah, Montrose," Lord Pemberton approached with the slightly nervous air of a man unsure of his guest's reaction to an unconventional situation. "Delighted you could join us this evening. I should mention that Lady Victoria Langley will be attending tonight, her first social appearance since her unfortunate accident." Adrian's expression remained carefully neutral, though his interest was immediately piqued. He had heard the whispered stories about Lady Victoria's fall from grace, the riding accident that had transformed London's most celebrated beauty into an object of pity and uncomfortable sympathy. But he had also heard rumors of her extraordinary courage in facing her changed circumstances, her refusal to retreat entirely from the world despite society's obvious discomfort with her presence. "I see," Adrian replied quietly. "And how has Lady Victoria been received this evening?" Lord Pemberton's expression grew uncomfortable. "Well, you know how it is, Montrose. People mean well, of course, but they're not quite certain how to— that is, her situation is rather delicate." Before Adrian could respond to this diplomatic evasion, a subtle change in the room's atmosphere announced the arrival of someone significant. Conversations grew quieter, heads turned toward the entrance, and Adrian saw the unmistakable signs of a gathering preparing to witness either a triumph or a tragedy. Lady Victoria Langley entered the drawing room with a dignity that took Adrian's breath away. Seated in an elegant wheeled chair that had been crafted to minimize its medical appearance, she moved with the same grace that had once made her the toast of London, her golden hair arranged in a sophisticated style that emphasized the classical beauty of her features. Her gown of deep sapphire silk had been carefully chosen to complement her cornflower blue eyes while accommodating her seated position, and she wore her changed circumstances like a queen wearing a crown, with absolute authority and unshakable poise. But it was not her physical beauty that captured Adrian's attention, remarkable though it remained. It was the strength he saw in her eyes, the courage evident in every line of her posture, the refusal to be diminished by circumstances that would have broken someone of lesser character. Here was a woman who had faced the worst that life could offer and emerged not defeated but refined, like steel tempered in fire. The reaction of the assembled company was immediate and telling. Some guests averted their eyes, as though Victoria's condition might be contagious. Others offered the kind of overly bright smiles that spoke more of discomfort than genuine warmth. A few approached to offer carefully worded expressions of sympathy that managed to sound more like condolences than greetings. Adrian watched this display of social cowardice with growing fury, his hands clenching into fists as he witnessed the cruel transformation of a woman who had once been celebrated into an object of uncomfortable pity. When he saw Lady Pemberton approach Victoria with the kind of patronizing solicitude reserved for invalids and children, something inside him snapped. "My dear Victoria," Lady Pemberton was saying, in a voice loud enough to carry across the room, "how brave of you to venture out this evening. We've arranged everything for your comfort, of course. The chair by the pianoforte has excellent acoustics, and you'll be quite out of the way of the dancing later." "Out of the way," Adrian repeated, his voice cutting through the polite murmur of conversation like a blade through silk. Every head in the room turned toward him as he moved through the crowd with purposeful strides, his grey eyes blazing with righteous anger. "Your Grace?" Lady Pemberton stammered, clearly taken aback by the intensity of his expression. Adrian ignored her entirely, his attention focused solely on Victoria, who looked up at him with surprise and wariness. He had never been formally introduced to her, though he had admired her from afar during her triumphant seasons, and he could see the questions in her remarkable blue eyes as he approached. "Lady Victoria," he said, offering her a bow that was both respectful and somehow intimate, as though they were the only two people in the room. "You look absolutely radiant this evening." Victoria felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment, delivered with such sincerity that it bore no resemblance to the careful platitudes she had been receiving all evening. "Your Grace, "You're very kind, though I fear nothing," Adrian interrupted gently, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "Least of all the opinions of people who mistake physical perfection for true worth." The words fell into the gathering like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples of shock and speculation that spread through the assembled company with breathtaking speed. Adrian was aware of the stares, the whispers, the sense that he was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. But as he looked into Victoria's eyes and saw the mixture of hope and disbelief there, he knew that he had never been more certain of anything in his life. "Lady Victoria," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word, "would you do me the honor of allowing me to escort you to supper?" The request was simple enough, the kind of courtesy any gentleman might offer to any lady. But in the context of Victoria's changed circumstances, it carried the weight of a revolutionary act. No one had offered to escort her anywhere since her accident. No one had treated her as a desirable companion rather than an object of pity. I would be honored, Your Grace," Victoria replied, her voice barely above a whisper as she struggled to process the magnitude of what was happening. Adrian moved to the side of her chair, offering his arm in the same manner he would to any lady, his actions declaring to everyone present that he saw no difference between Victoria and any other woman in the room. As they made their way toward the supper room, the crowd parted before them like the Red Sea, guests stepping aside with expressions of amazement, confusion, and in some cases, disapproval. But Adrian was not finished. As they paused in the doorway of the supper room with every eye in both rooms fixed upon them, he turned to address the assembled company with the full authority of his ducal position. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly through both rooms, "I believe there has been some confusion this evening about Lady Victoria's place in our society. Allow me to clarify the situation." The silence that followed was so complete that the ticking of the mantel clock seemed as loud as thunder. Victoria felt her heart racing as she realized that Adrian was about to make some kind of public declaration, though she couldn't imagine what he intended to say. "Lady Victoria Langley," Adrian continued, his grey eyes blazing with conviction, "is not an object of pity. She is not someone to be hidden away or treated with condescending sympathy. She is a woman of extraordinary courage, remarkable beauty, and unshakable dignity who has faced adversity with a grace that humbles us all." The words hit the gathering like physical blows, challenging every assumption they had made about Victoria's worth and place in their world. But Adrian was not finished. "Furthermore," he said, his voice growing even more powerful, "I want to make it clear to everyone present that Lady Victoria is under my personal protection. Any slight offered to her will be considered a slight offered to me. Any discourtesy shown to her will be answered by me personally." The threat was unmistakable, delivered with the kind of quiet authority that made it clear Adrian was prepared to back up his words with action. But even this was not the climax of his declaration. "And finally," Adrian said, turning to look directly at Victoria with an expression of such tenderness that it took her breath away, "I want everyone in this room to understand that Lady Victoria Langley is not unwanted or unclaimed. She is mine." The words exploded through the gathering like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves through the assembled company that would reverberate through London society for months to come. Adrian Montrose, Duke of Montrose, one of the most powerful and eligible men in England, had just publicly claimed the woman that no one else would touch, the lady that society had written off as unmarriageable. Victoria stared up at him in amazement, hardly able to believe what she had just heard. "Your Grace," she whispered, "you cannot mean—" "I mean every word," Adrian replied, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "You are mine, Victoria, mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to love for as long as you'll have me." As the full meaning of his declaration sank in, Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of sorrow or self-pity, but tears of joy and wonder at this unexpected miracle. For the first time since her accident, someone was looking at her not with pity, but with love, not as a burden, but as a prize worth claiming. The gathering erupted into chaos as guests struggled to process what they had just witnessed. Some were scandalized by Adrian's unprecedented declaration, others were moved by the obvious sincerity of his feelings, and still others were simply confused by this dramatic departure from social norms. But Adrian and Victoria were oblivious to the commotion around them, lost in each other's eyes as they began to understand that their lives had just changed forever. The Duke had indeed declared that she was his, and in doing so, he had transformed her from society's cast-off into the most envied woman in London. The evening that had begun as Victoria's tentative return to society had become the night when love conquered prejudice, when courage triumphed over convention, and when a Duke's declaration proved that true worth had nothing to do with physical perfection and everything to do with the content of one's heart. The courtship, the morning after Lady Pemberton's musical evening, dawned grey and drizzling, but Victoria woke with a lightness in her heart that she hadn't felt since before her accident. Adrian's extraordinary declaration still seemed like a dream, too wonderful to be real, yet the memory of his grey eyes blazing with conviction as he proclaimed her as his own was burned into her consciousness with crystal clarity. She was still in her dressing gown, taking her morning tea in the sunny breakfast room that had been converted for her use, when her mother burst through the door with an expression of barely controlled hysteria. "Victoria, darling, what have you done?" Lady Margaret Langley exclaimed, clutching a handful of hastily delivered notes and calling cards. "Half of London is in an uproar over last night's proceedings. The Duke of Montrose's declaration has set tongues wagging from Mayfair to Cheapside." "What sort of uproar?" Victoria asked, though her heart was already sinking as she recognized the familiar pattern of scandal and gossip that seemed to follow her everywhere now. "Well, Lady Pemberton is beside herself, claiming that the Duke's behaviour was highly irregular and that she's never been so shocked in her life. Lord Worthington has sent a note expressing his concern about your association with someone of such unconventional views. And the Dowager Duchess of Marlborough has cancelled her invitation to next week's garden party, citing unforeseen circumstances." Victoria felt the familiar weight of disappointment settling over her shoulders like a heavy cloak. "I see. So the Duke's kindness has only made my situation worse." "Kindness?" Lady Margaret repeated, her voice rising with incredulity. "Victoria, the man publicly declared that you belong to him, in front of half the ton. That's not kindness, That's what, Mama?" Victoria asked quietly, though she thought she already knew the answer. "That's madness," her mother finished helplessly. "Darling, I know you've been lonely since your accident, and I understand that any attention from an eligible gentleman would seem welcome, but you must understand that the Duke's declaration cannot possibly be serious. Men like Adrian Montrose don't marry women in your condition." The words hit Victoria like physical blows, all the more painful because they echoed her own deepest fears. "You think he was mocking me, making sport of my situation?" "I think he was being gallant," Lady Margaret said more gently, recognizing the pain in her daughter's voice. "Perhaps he saw how cruelly you were being treated and felt moved to make a grand gesture. But Victoria, you mustn't read more into it than was intended. The Duke is known for his principles, his sense of justice. Last night was probably nothing more than his way of defending someone he perceived as being treated unfairly." Before Victoria could respond to this crushing assessment, their butler appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely concealed excitement. "My lady," he announced formally, "His Grace the Duke of Montrose has called and requests an audience with Lady Victoria." The silence that followed this announcement was deafening. Lady Margaret's face went pale, while Victoria felt her heart begin to race with a mixture of hope and terror. "He's here," Victoria whispered. "Now?" "Indeed, my lady. He's waiting in the blue drawing room and has indicated that he has matters of some importance to discuss." Victoria looked at her mother, seeing her own confusion and uncertainty reflected in Lady Margaret's eyes. I suppose I should see him." "Victoria, you're not even properly dressed," her mother protested weakly. "I think, given the circumstances, His Grace will understand," Victoria replied with more confidence than she felt. "Please ask him to wait while I make myself presentable." 20 minutes later, Victoria entered the blue drawing room, wearing a morning dress of soft lavender that complemented her eyes and emphasized the golden highlights in her hair. She had taken special care with her appearance, knowing that this conversation would likely determine the course of her future. Adrian rose as she entered, his imposing figure seeming to fill the elegant room with his presence. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored morning coat of dark blue wool that emphasized his broad shoulders and commanding height, and his grey eyes were warm with an emotion that made Victoria's pulse quicken. "Lady Victoria," he said, offering a bow that was both respectful and somehow intimate. "Thank you for receiving me. I hope I haven't called at an inconvenient time." "Not at all, Your Grace," Victoria replied, maneuvering her chair to face him directly. "Though I confess myself curious about the purpose of your visit." Adrian's expression grew serious as he took the chair across from her, his grey eyes never leaving her face. "I've come to clarify my intentions, Victoria. Last night's declaration was not made in the heat of the moment or out of some misguided sense of chivalry. I meant every word." Victoria felt her breath catch at the sincerity in his voice, but years of disappointment had taught her to be cautious. "Your Grace, you barely know me. How can you make such claims about your feelings?" "You're right that we haven't been formally acquainted," Adrian admitted. "But I've been aware of you for longer than you might imagine. I've watched you navigate society with grace and intelligence, seen the way you treat others with kindness regardless of their station, observed your courage in facing circumstances that would have broken someone of lesser character." "You've been watching me?" Victoria asked, surprised by this revelation. "From a distance, yes," Adrian confirmed. "Even before your accident, I admired your spirit, your refusal to be impressed by wealth or title alone, your genuine warmth toward everyone you met. And since your accident, Victoria, the way you've handled your changed circumstances has been nothing short of extraordinary." "Extraordinary?" Victoria repeated with a bitter laugh. "Your Grace, I've become a social pariah, someone to be pitied and avoided." "How is that extraordinary?" "Because you've refused to be defeated," Adrian said with quiet intensity. "Because you've maintained your dignity in the face of cruelty and ignorance. Because you've shown more courage in the past 6 months than most people show in a lifetime." Victoria stared at him, hardly able to believe that someone could see her situation in such a positive light. "But surely you understand the practical difficulties. I cannot walk, cannot dance, cannot fulfill many of the expectations that society has for a wife." "And I cannot understand why any of those things matter," Adrian replied firmly. "Victoria, I'm not looking for a wife who can dance. I'm looking for a partner who can challenge my thinking, share my interests, and stand beside me as an equal. I'm looking for someone who understands that true worth has nothing to do with physical capabilities and everything to do with character." "You speak as though from personal experience," Victoria observed, noting the passion in his voice. Adrian was quiet for a moment, his expression growing distant. "My younger sister was born with a withered arm. Society treated her as though she were somehow less than other children, whispered about her behind fans, excluded her from activities because her presence made them uncomfortable. She died when she was 16, believing that she was a burden to our family and unworthy of love." "I'm so sorry," Victoria said softly, understanding now the source of his fierce protectiveness. "I swore then that I would never allow society's narrow-minded prejudices to go unchallenged in my presence," Adrian continued. "And I swore that if I ever found someone who possessed the kind of strength and grace that my sister had, I would value them as they deserved to be valued." "And you believe I possess such qualities?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you do," Adrian replied with absolute conviction. "Victoria, you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever met. Your accident hasn't diminished you. It's revealed the extraordinary person you've always been." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she struggled to process the magnitude of what he was saying. "Adrian, even if you truly mean what you're saying, you must consider the practical implications. The scandal of such a marriage would be enormous. Your reputation, your political influence, your standing in society, all of it would be at risk." "Let it be at risk," Adrian said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Victoria, I've spent my entire adult life living according to other people's expectations, maintaining my reputation for the sake of appearances. But what good is a reputation if it prevents me from claiming the woman I love?" "Love?" Victoria repeated, her heart racing at the word. "Yes, love," Adrian confirmed, rising from his chair to kneel beside her wheelchair, taking her hands in his with gentle strength. "I love your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to be diminished by circumstances beyond your control. I love the way you see the best in people, the way you treat everyone with kindness, the way you've maintained your dignity despite facing the worst that society can offer. But Adrian, I cannot give you children who can walk, cannot be the kind of duchess that society expects." "You can be the kind of duchess that I need," Adrian interrupted gently. "Someone who understands that true nobility comes from character, not birth. Someone who will use whatever influence she has to help others who have been cast aside by society's prejudices. Someone who will stand beside me as we work to create a better world for everyone, regardless of their physical capabilities." Victoria looked into his grey eyes and saw not pity but love, not charity but genuine desire, not obligation but choice freely made. Adrian, are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner, my equal in all things, Adrian replied, his voice thick with emotion. I'm asking you to help me prove that love is stronger than prejudice, that worth is measured by character rather than physical perfection, that two people who truly see and value each other can overcome any obstacle society might place in their path. And if I say yes, if I agree to this madness, then we'll face whatever comes together, Adrian said simply. We'll weather the scandal, overcome the opposition, and build a life based on love and mutual respect rather than social convention. Victoria studied his face, seeing the absolute sincerity in his expression, the unwavering conviction that their love could indeed conquer all. For the first time since her accident, she felt hope blooming in her chest like a flower opening to the sun. Yes, she whispered, the word barely audible but carrying the weight of a decision that would change both their lives forever. Yes, Adrian repeated, his face lighting with joy. Yes, I'll marry you, Victoria said more firmly, her voice growing stronger with each word. I love you, Adrian, more than I ever thought possible. If you're truly willing to face whatever challenges await us, then yes, I'll be your wife. Adrian's response was to lean forward and kiss her, with a tenderness that spoke to months of restrained longing. A kiss that promised a future filled with love, challenge, and the kind of happiness that came from choosing each other against all odds. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had just committed to, Adrian rested his forehead against hers and smiled. We're going to face opposition, he said quietly. There will be those who try to convince us that we're making a mistake, that love isn't enough to overcome the obstacles in our path. Then we'll prove them wrong, Victoria replied with a confidence that surprised her. We'll show them that true love, when it's built on mutual respect and shared values, can indeed conquer all. Together? Adrian asked, his voice warm with love and promise. Together, Victoria confirmed, and as he kissed her again, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the man she loved by her side, and that would make all the difference in the world. The Duke had indeed declared that she was his, and in accepting his proposal, Victoria had proven that sometimes the greatest love stories began not with perfection, but with the courage to see past surface appearances to the extraordinary person within. Facing the storm, the announcement of the Duke of Montrose's engagement to Lady Victoria Langley sent shockwaves through London society that reverberated from the grandest mansions of Mayfair to the humblest drawing rooms of the merchant class. Within hours of the formal notice appearing in the morning papers, the couple found themselves at the center of a social hurricane that threatened to destroy everything they had dared to hope for. Victoria's first indication of the storm to come arrived with her morning chocolate in the form of a hastily scrawled note from Lady Catherine, her former closest friend. Dearest Victoria, I hardly know what to say about the news of your engagement. While I'm certain the Duke's intentions are honorable, I cannot help but feel that you may be making a terrible mistake. Society is already buzzing with the most dreadful gossip, and I fear that your association with such scandal will only make your situation more difficult. Perhaps it would be wise to consider whether accepting the Duke's proposal is truly in your best interests, or whether it might be kinder to release him from what many are calling an obligation born of misguided chivalry. With deepest concern for your welfare, Catherine Victoria read the letter twice, each reading making the betrayal more painful. Catherine, who had once sworn eternal friendship, who had promised to stand by her through any adversity, was now suggesting that she should release Adrian from their engagement for his own good. Bad news, darling? Her mother asked, noting Victoria's expression as she entered the morning room. Catherine thinks I should cry off, Victoria replied, her voice carefully controlled despite the pain in her heart. She believes I'm being selfish in accepting Adrian's proposal. Lady Margaret sighed, settling into her chair with the weary air of a woman who had spent a sleepless night worrying about her daughter's future. I'm afraid Catherine isn't the only one expressing such sentiments. I've received 3 letters this morning from friends expressing their concerns about the match. What sort of concerns? Victoria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. They question whether the Duke can truly be serious about marrying someone in your condition, whether he's perhaps acting out of pity or some misguided sense of honor. They worry that the scandal will damage his reputation irreparably and suggest that a woman who truly cared for him would spare him such consequences. Victoria felt each word like a physical blow, the familiar weight of self-doubt settling over her shoulders. "And what do you think, Mama? Do you believe I'm being selfish in accepting his proposal?" Lady Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying her daughter's face with the shrewd eyes that had made her one of society's most perceptive observers. "I think," she said finally, "that the Duke of Montrose is a man of extraordinary intelligence and unshakable principles. If he says he loves you and wants to marry you, then I believe he means exactly what he says." "But," Victoria prompted, hearing the reservation in her mother's voice, "but I also think you need to be prepared for the consequences of such a marriage. Society can be cruel to those who defy its expectations, and the Duke's declaration has certainly done that. Are you strong enough to face years of whispers, snubs, and social ostracism?" Before Victoria could answer, their butler appeared with news that the Duke himself had called and was requesting an audience. Victoria felt her heart lift at the prospect of seeing Adrian, of drawing strength from his unwavering conviction that their love could overcome any obstacle. She found him in the blue drawing room, standing before the fireplace, with an expression of barely controlled fury that transformed his aristocratic features into something almost dangerous. In his hands he held several newspapers, their pages folded to reveal headlines that made Victoria's stomach clench with dread. "Have you seen these?" Adrian asked without preamble, his voice tight with anger as he gestured toward the papers. Victoria shook her head, suddenly reluctant to learn what the press was saying about their engagement. "Duke's folly. Montrose to wed crippled lady," Adrian read, his voice dripping with disgust. "A marriage of pity. Society questions Duke's motives. The paralyzed bride. Can love conquer all?" Each headline was more painful than the last, reducing their love story to a spectacle for public consumption, questioning the very foundations of their relationship. Victoria felt tears threatening, but she forced them back, determined not to let the cruelty of strangers break her resolve. "Adrian, perhaps we should—" she began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. "If you're about to suggest that we reconsider our engagement, I won't hear it," he said firmly. "Victoria, I don't care what the papers say, what society thinks, or what consequences we might face. I love you, and I'm going to marry you, and nothing, absolutely nothing, will change my mind about that. But surely you must see how this affects your reputation, your standing." "My standing with whom?" Adrian interrupted, moving to kneel beside her chair as he had the day before. "With people who judge worth by physical appearance? With those who mistake cruelty for sophistication? Victoria, if marrying you costs me the approval of such people, then I consider it a price well paid. But your political career, your ability to influence important matters, will be enhanced, not diminished, by having you as my Duchess," Adrian said with conviction. "Victoria, you have a strength and perspective that I lack, an understanding of adversity that will make me a better leader, a more compassionate advocate for those who need protection. If anything, marrying you will make me more effective, not less." Victoria searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or reservation, but found only unwavering determination and love. "Adrian, I need you to understand something. The whispers, the stares, the social ostracism, these things don't end. They become part of daily life. Are you truly prepared for that?" "I'm prepared for anything, as long as I face it with you," Adrian replied without hesitation. "Victoria, my sister spent her entire short life believing that she was less worthy of love because of her physical differences. I won't let society's prejudices rob us of the happiness we found together." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, the Dowager Duchess of Montrose, Adrian's formidable mother, whose reputation for sharp wit and sharper tongue had made her one of society's most feared arbiters of propriety. "Adrian," she announced as she swept into the room without waiting for a proper introduction, "I've come to discuss this situation you've created." The Dowager Duchess was a woman of 68 years who carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Her silver hair was arranged in a severe style that emphasized her aristocratic features, and her pale blue eyes missed nothing as they took in Victoria's appearance and circumstances. "Mother," Adrian said, rising to greet her with careful courtesy, "may I present Lady Victoria Langley, my fiancée? Victoria, this is my mother, the Dowager Duchess of Montrose." Victoria executed as graceful a curtsy as her seated position allowed, her years of training serving her well despite her nervousness. "Your Grace, I'm honored to meet you." The Dowager Duchess studied Victoria with the intensity of a general surveying a battlefield, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "Lady Victoria, I confess myself curious about this engagement. My son has always been known for his unconventional views, but this surpasses even his usual disregard for social norms." "Mother," Adrian said, his voice carrying a warning, but the Dowager Duchess held up a hand to silence him. "I'm not finished, Adrian. Lady Victoria, I assume you understand the magnitude of what you're undertaking, the scrutiny you'll face as the Duchess of Montrose, the expectations that come with such a position." "I understand that I may not meet all of those expectations, Your Grace," Victoria replied with quiet dignity. "But I hope to prove myself worthy of your son's trust and your family's acceptance through my actions rather than my capabilities." "Interesting," the Dowager Duchess mused. "And what do you believe you can offer my son that the dozens of perfectly healthy, well-connected young ladies of the ton cannot?" The question was cruel in its directness, but Victoria had faced worse in the months since her accident. "I can offer him honesty, Your Grace. I will never love him for his title or his wealth, because I have nothing to gain from either. I will never flatter him for advancement, because I have no family connections to promote. What I can give him is the truth, about myself, about the world, about the strength that comes from facing adversity and emerging not broken, but refined." The Dowager Duchess was silent for a long moment, her sharp eyes studying Victoria's face with an intensity that made her feel as though every thought and feeling were being catalogued and assessed. "You speak well," she said finally, "but pretty words are easily spoken. How do I know that you won't become a burden to my son, that you won't limit his activities, his social obligations, his ability to fulfill his duties as a duke?" "You don't," Victoria replied honestly. "Just as I don't know whether I'll prove strong enough to be the Duchess he needs, or whether our love will be sufficient to overcome the obstacles we'll face. But Your Grace, I can promise you this. I will never ask your son to diminish himself for my sake. If I cannot adapt to his world, if I cannot find ways to contribute meaningfully to his life and work, then I will release him from our engagement myself." "Victoria," Adrian protested, but she continued speaking, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "But I have to believe that love built on mutual respect and shared values can overcome any challenge. Your son sees worth in me that society refuses to acknowledge. If he's right, if I can indeed be the partner he needs, then our marriage will prove that true nobility comes from character, not circumstance." The Dowager Duchess was quiet for several minutes, her expression thoughtful as she considered Victoria's words. Finally, she turned to her son with a look that Victoria couldn't quite interpret. "Adrian, are you absolutely certain about this course of action? There will be no going back once you're married. The scandal will follow you both for years, possibly decades." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Adrian replied firmly. "Mother, Victoria is the woman I want to spend my life with, the partner I need to become the man I'm meant to be. If that scandalizes society, then perhaps society needs to be scandalized." "Very well," the Dowager Duchess said with a decisive nod. "If you're determined to proceed with this marriage, then you'll do it properly. The wedding will be held at Montrose House, with all the ceremony and grandeur befitting a ducal marriage. If society wishes to whisper about your choice of bride, they'll do so while acknowledging that she is indeed a duchess, with all the respect and deference that position commands." Victoria stared at the older woman in amazement, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. "Your Grace, are you saying that you approve of our engagement?" "I'm saying that I approve of my son's happiness," the Dowager Duchess replied, with a slight smile that transformed her austere features. "And I'm saying that any woman strong enough to face down society's prejudices with such grace and dignity is exactly the kind of duchess this family needs." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and controversy as London society struggled to come to terms with the impending marriage. Some members of the ton rallied to the couple's support, moved by the obvious sincerity of their affection and impressed by Victoria's courage in facing her changed circumstances. Others remained steadfastly opposed, viewing the match as a dangerous precedent that threatened the very foundations of their carefully ordered world. The wedding preparations themselves became a statement of defiance against those who questioned the appropriateness of the match. The Dowager Duchess threw herself into the planning with the efficiency of a military commander, ensuring that every detail would reflect the dignity and importance of the occasion. "The ceremony will be held in the chapel at Montrose House," she informed Victoria during one of their planning sessions. It's been the site of ducal weddings for over 2 centuries, and yours will be no exception. The guest list will include every member of the nobility who has the courage to celebrate love over convention. And those who don't have such courage, Victoria asked, will reveal themselves for the small-minded individuals they are, the Dowager Duchess replied with satisfaction. My dear, by the time we're finished, your wedding will be the event of the season, and anyone who chooses not to attend will be marking themselves as irrelevant to fashionable society. As the wedding day approached, Victoria found herself marveling at the transformation in her circumstances. 6 months ago, she had been a social pariah, someone to be pitied and avoided. Now she was about to become one of the most powerful women in England, with a husband who loved her unconditionally and a mother-in-law who had become her fiercest advocate. The night before the wedding, as Victoria sat in her room at Langley Park for the last time as an unmarried woman, her mother came to sit beside her with an expression of wonder and pride. I owe you an apology, darling, Lady Margaret said softly. When Adrian first declared his intentions, I thought he was acting out of misguided chivalry. I couldn't believe that a man of his position would genuinely want to marry someone in your situation. And now, Victoria asked, now I see that he didn't fall in love with you despite your circumstances, but because of the strength and grace you've shown in facing them. You've become a better person through your trials, Victoria, and he recognizes that. He sees the woman you've become, not the woman you used to be. I'm terrified, Mama, Victoria admitted quietly. What if I can't be the Duchess he needs? What if I fail him? Then you'll learn from your mistakes and try again, Lady Margaret replied with a smile. But Victoria, I don't think you'll fail. I think you'll surprise everyone, including yourself, with what you're capable of achieving. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, as though the heavens themselves were blessing the union. Victoria woke with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, knowing that this day would mark not just the beginning of her marriage, but her transformation from society's cast-off into one of its most prominent figures. As her maids helped her into her wedding gown, a creation of ivory silk and Brussels lace that had been specially designed to accommodate her seated position while emphasizing her natural beauty, Victoria thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The accident that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something far more precious than she had ever dared to imagine. You look absolutely radiant, my lady, Sarah said, as she arranged Victoria's golden hair in an elaborate style adorned with pearls and orange blossoms. His Grace is the luckiest man in England. I think I'm the lucky one, Victoria replied, her voice thick with emotion. A year ago, I thought my life was over. Now I'm about to marry the most wonderful man in the world and begin an adventure I never could have imagined. The ceremony itself was everything the Dowager Duchess had promised, a magnificent celebration that filled the chapel at Montrose House with flowers, music, and the cream of London society. Those who had chosen to attend did so with genuine joy, moved by the obvious love between the bride and groom, and impressed by the dignity with which Victoria carried herself. As Victoria made her way down the aisle in her specially designed chair, decorated with white roses and trailing ribbons, she felt no shame or self-consciousness about her mode of transportation. Instead, she felt only joy and anticipation as she moved toward the man who had seen past her physical limitations to the woman within. Adrian waited for her at the altar, with an expression of such love and pride that it took her breath away. When she reached his side and he took her hand in his, Victoria felt as though she were exactly where she belonged, where she had always been meant to be. Dearly beloved, the Archbishop began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed chapel, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Adrian Charles Montrose, Duke of Montrose, and Lady Victoria Elizabeth Langley, in holy matrimony. As they exchanged vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever challenges lay ahead, Victoria felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. This was right. She knew with absolute certainty. This was what love was supposed to feel like, not desperate or dependent, but strong and sure and capable of weathering any storm. You may kiss the bride, the Archbishop announced, and when Adrian leaned down to press his lips to hers, Victoria felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. I love you, Your Grace, Adrian whispered against her lips, using her new title with a warmth that made her laugh through her tears. And I love you, Your Grace, Victoria replied, marveling at the fact that she was now the Duchess of Montrose, that the impossible dream had somehow become reality. The reception that followed was a triumph of love over prejudice, as guest after guest approached the couple to offer their congratulations and express their admiration for the courage they had shown in following their hearts despite society's disapproval. "You've done something remarkable today," the Duke of Wellington told Adrian, as they stood together watching Victoria hold court from her chair, surrounded by well-wishers and admirers. "You've shown that true nobility comes from character, not circumstance. That's a lesson this society desperately needed to learn." As the evening drew to a close and the last guests departed, Victoria and Adrian found themselves alone in the grand ballroom of Montrose House, surrounded by the remnants of their wedding celebration. Victoria looked around at the flowers, the empty champagne glasses, the evidence of a day that had exceeded her wildest dreams, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the man who had made it all possible. "No regrets?" Adrian asked softly, echoing the question that had become something of a ritual between them. "Only one," Victoria replied with a smile that was both mischievous and tender. "What's that?" Adrian asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't truly worried. "That it took an accident to show me what real strength was, what true love looked like," Victoria said, her voice filled with wonder at the journey that had brought them together. "Without that fall, I might never have discovered who I really was, what I was truly capable of becoming." "Then perhaps," Adrian said, kneeling beside her chair to take her hands in his, "we should be grateful for the circumstances that brought us together, however painful they may have been at the time." "Perhaps we should," Victoria agreed, and as he kissed her again, she knew that their love story was just beginning, that the challenges they would face as husband and wife would only make their bond stronger, their love deeper, their commitment to each other more unshakable. The Duke had indeed declared that she was his, and in claiming her as his own, he had proven that true love saw not limitations, but possibilities, not weakness but strength, not imperfection, but the kind of beauty that came from a spirit refined by adversity and purified by courage. Their wedding day had been more than a celebration of their love. It had been a declaration of war against society's narrow definitions of worth and beauty, a statement that dignity came not from physical perfection, but from the content of one's character, and a promise that their marriage would serve as an example to others that love, when it was real and strong and supported by unwavering commit, could indeed conquer all. The Duchess triumphant. 5 years had passed since the wedding that had scandalized London society, and the transformation in both Victoria and the world around her had been nothing short of remarkable. The woman who had once been dismissed as unmarriageable had become one of the most respected and influential duchesses in England, using her position and her unique perspective to champion causes that had long been ignored by the aristocracy. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the elegant breakfast room at Montrose House as Victoria reviewed the correspondence that had arrived with the Dawn Post. At 29, she had grown into her role as Duchess with a grace and authority that impressed even her harshest former critics. Her golden hair now arranged in the sophisticated style of a woman of influence, her cornflower blue eyes bright with the satisfaction of meaningful work. "The Queen has accepted our invitation to the charity gala," Victoria announced to Adrian as he entered the room, dressed for his morning ride in perfectly tailored riding clothes that emphasized his continued vitality and commanding presence. "Her Majesty specifically mentioned her admiration for the work we've done with the hospital for injured veterans." "Excellent," Adrian replied, settling into his chair with the easy confidence of a man who had found his perfect partner in all endeavors. "And what news from the Committee on Educational Reform?" "Lord Melbourne has agreed to sponsor our bill in the House of Lords," Victoria said with satisfaction. "He says our proposal for schools that accommodate children with physical limitations is exactly the kind of progressive thinking the country needs." The Montrose Foundation for Adaptive Education had become Victoria's greatest passion, a revolutionary organization that provided schooling and opportunities for children who had been written off by society due to physical disabilities or limitations. What had begun as Victoria's personal mission to ensure that no child would face the isolation and despair she had experienced had grown into a nationwide movement that was changing how society viewed and treated those with physical differences. "I have news as well," Adrian said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "The Prince Regent has agreed to serve as patron for our new rehabilitation centre. He was quite moved by your letter describing the need for facilities that help people adapt to life-changing injuries." Victoria felt tears of joy spring to her eyes at this latest validation of their work. "Adrian, do you realize what this means? With royal patronage, we'll be able to expand our programs throughout the kingdom. We'll be able to help thousands of people who have been abandoned by society, just as I was. Just as you were, Adrian agreed, moving to kneel beside her chair, as he had so many times over the years, taking her hands in his with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. And look what you've accomplished, my love. You've transformed not just your own life, but the lives of countless others who needed someone to show them that physical limitations don't define human worth. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their 3-year-old son, little Charles, who burst into the room with the boundless energy of a child who had never known anything but love and acceptance. With his father's dark hair and his mother's bright blue eyes, he was a beautiful child whose laughter filled every room he entered. "Mama! Papa!" he exclaimed, running to Victoria's chair and climbing onto her lap with the casual affection of a child who had never seen his mother's wheelchair as anything unusual. "Nurse says we can go to the park today if the weather stays nice." "That sounds wonderful, darling," Victoria said, smoothing his hair with gentle hands. "But first, you must have your breakfast and let Nurse wash your face properly." As Charles chatted about his plans for the day, Victoria marveled at the life she and Adrian had built together. Their son had been born healthy and strong, a living testament to the fact that love could indeed create miracles. He was being raised to understand that worth came from character rather than physical capabilities, that kindness was more important than conformity, and that his mother's wheelchair was simply one of the many things that made their family unique and special. "Your Grace," their butler announced from the doorway, "Lady Catherine Ashford has called and requests an audience with your Grace." Victoria felt a familiar tightness in her chest at the mention of her former friend's name. Catherine had been conspicuously absent from their wedding and had made no effort to maintain their friendship in the years since, apparently unable to reconcile herself to Victoria's dramatic change in circumstances. "Show her to the blue drawing room," Victoria said quietly. "I'll be along presently." 20 minutes later, Victoria entered the drawing room to find Catherine standing by the window, her figure as elegant as ever, but her face marked by lines of discontent that spoke to years of unhappiness. At 28, Catherine had married well but not wisely, choosing a wealthy but cold husband who provided her with social status but little joy. "Catherine," Victoria said warmly, maneuvering her chair to face her former friend directly. "How lovely to see you. It's been far too long." Catherine turned from the window with an expression that mixed shame and wonder in equal measure. "Victoria, I hardly know what to say. When I saw you at the opera last week, surrounded by admirers and clearly so happy, I realized how wrong I've been about everything." "Wrong about what?" Victoria asked gently, though she suspected she knew the answer. "About your marriage, about your capabilities, about what your accident meant for your future," Catherine said, her voice thick with regret. "Victoria, I was so convinced that accepting the Duke's proposal was a mistake, that you were setting yourself up for disappointment and heartbreak. I thought he was acting out of pity, and that eventually he would come to resent the limitations your condition would place on his life." "And now," Victoria prompted, her voice carefully neutral. "Now I see that I was the one who was limited," Catherine admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Limited in my understanding, in my ability to see past surface appearances to the truth beneath. Victoria, you've become everything I always knew you could be. Influential, respected, beloved. You've used your position to help others, to change laws, to make the world a better place for people who have been forgotten by society." "Catherine, please let me finish," Catherine interrupted, her voice breaking with emotion. "I've spent 5 years watching from a distance as you built a life that puts my own to shame. You have a husband who adores you, a beautiful child, meaningful work that changes lives, and the respect of everyone who matters. Meanwhile, I'm married for status and security, and I've never been more miserable in my life." Victoria felt her heart go out to her former friend, recognizing the pain and regret in Catherine's voice. "Catherine, what's done is done. We both made choices based on what we thought was best at the time. But your choices were brave, while mine were cowardly," Catherine said with brutal honesty. "You chose love over security, purpose over comfort, meaning over convenience. I chose the safe path, the expected path, and it's led me nowhere but to a life of quiet desperation." "It's not too late to change course," Victoria said gently. "Catherine, you're still young, still capable of finding meaning and purpose in your life. If your marriage isn't bringing you happiness, Perhaps there are other ways to find fulfillment. Like what you've done with your foundation? Catherine asked hopefully. Exactly like that, Victoria confirmed. Catherine, there's so much work to be done, so many people who need help and advocacy. If you're truly interested in finding purpose, I could use your help with the Educational Reform Committee. Your organizational skills and social connections would be invaluable. Catherine's face lit up with the first genuine smile Victoria had seen from her in years. You would trust me with such important work, after the way I abandoned you when you needed friends most? I would trust you because I know your heart, Victoria replied, with the warmth that had always characterized their friendship. And because I believe that people can grow and change, that past mistakes don't have to define future possibilities. As Catherine departed an hour later with a list of committee meetings to attend and projects to consider, Victoria felt a deep satisfaction at the restoration of their friendship. It was yet another example of how her life had come full circle, how the challenges she had faced had ultimately led to opportunities she never could have imagined. That evening, as Victoria and Adrian prepared for bed in their elegant suite at Montrose House, they reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. Catherine's visit today made me think about how much has changed, Victoria said, as Adrian helped her transfer from her chair to their bed, a routine they had perfected over the years with love and patience. 5 years ago, I thought my accident had destroyed my life. Now I can see that it was actually the beginning of my real life. How so? Adrian asked, settling beside her with the easy intimacy of a couple whose love had only deepened with time. Before the accident, I was beautiful but shallow. Admired but not particularly useful, Victoria explained. I lived for parties and compliments and the approval of people whose opinions ultimately meant nothing. The accident forced me to discover who I really was beneath all the superficial accomplishments. And who were you? Adrian asked, though he already knew the answer. Someone with strength I didn't know I possessed, compassion I had never been forced to develop, and a purpose I never would have found if my life had continued on its original path, Victoria replied. Adrian, I'm grateful for my accident now, not for the pain it caused, but for the person it helped me become. And I'm grateful for the accident too, Adrian said, pulling her close with tender arms, because without it, I might never have seen past your beauty to the extraordinary woman beneath. I might have been content with a conventional marriage to a conventional duchess, never knowing what I was missing. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we had met before my accident? Victoria asked curiously. Adrian considered the question seriously. I think we might have been attracted to each other, but I don't think we would have fallen in love the way we did. Your accident didn't just reveal your strength to me, it revealed my own capacity for seeing past surface appearances to the truth beneath. We both had to grow into the people we needed to be for this love to work. So you think everything happened exactly as it was meant to? I think, Adrian said, kissing her forehead with infinite tenderness, that we were given exactly the challenges we needed to become the people we were meant to be. And I think our love story will inspire others to look past their own preconceptions about worth and beauty and perfection. As they settled into sleep in each other's arms, Victoria thought about the letter she had received that morning from a young woman who had been paralyzed in a carriage accident. The girl had written to thank Victoria for showing her that life after such an injury could still be meaningful and full of love, that physical limitations didn't have to mean the end of dreams and possibilities. It was letters like that one that made Victoria understand the true purpose of her journey. She had been cast out and abandoned, written off by society as unmarriageable and useless, but a